How's it going, Chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Adventures in Homebrewing, a sweet online store in America where you can get your homebrewing, mead making, wine making, and yes, even distilling needs right from the old computer machine. homebrewing.org/CTC. That'll take you to their specials page, and whatever you buy on the website after that, you'll get for the same price that you normally get. Obviously they love it because you're buying some stuff from it, but it also gives me a little kickback as well. Essentially for free, you're buying me a coffee or a beer. You get what you need and it helps me out as well, so that's pretty cool. Thank you, Adventures in Homebrewing. This podcast is also brought to you by Gladfield Malt. Great malt, mate, right here in New Zealand, which I freaking love. They've been helping me out for a long time now, so I thoroughly appreciate that. If you haven't tried some yourself, get your hands on some, you won't be disappointed. My guest today is Spencer Whelan from Texas in America, and I gotta tell you, man, this guy is one of my favorite people in whiskey, a absolute top-notch, just an all-around awesome human being. Spencer and his wife Sarah were some of the first people I met in Texas, and I'm honored to say that we got on like a house on fire. I love hanging out with them. I can't wait to physically be able to actually get back to Texas and hang out with Spencer and Sarah and all the other crew in Texas. But the real reason we're talking to Spencer today is he is the CEO of the Texas Whiskey Trail and the executive director of the Texas Whiskey Association. And both of those things have interesting connotations for distillers, distilleries, the industry as a whole, and also the consumers, the people that just enjoy drinking whiskey, especially if you like, being able to go and hang out at a distillery, visit a distillery, meet the distiller, do tours, all of those sorts of things. So any whiskey discussion with Spencer is a whole lot of fun, but whether or not you are a distiller, a hobbyist, or just a really enthusiastic consumer of whiskey, you're going to find this podcast interesting for you specifically. So without further ado, Spencer Whelan from Texas. Spencer, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us. For those of you that don't know, Spencer is the CEO of the Texas Whiskey Trail and the executive director of the Texas Whiskey Association. And the reason we wanted to get you on to talk is to kind of, I guess, illuminate and spread the good word of distilleries working together, of making something special of the region that you're in, of creating a bit of a buzz, of being able to bring people in as a destination, and also being able to export your whiskey as a coherent sort of idea or concept from a specific location. And I think you're in a really unique place to talk about this because Texas whiskey is new, relatively, and that's exactly what you guys are doing, right?
Oh yeah, I mean that's the entire concept behind the association and the trail, is that Texas is unique, and we know that it's unique because you go around the world, you show them a shape of the geographic boundary or political boundaries of the state of Texas, and everybody pretty much knows what that shape is, right?
Oh yeah.
You can walk to New Zealand, you can walk to Australia, you can walk to China, and you show them a picture of the state of Texas, and they understand that's Texas, right? Yeah. So as I like to say, Texas has really good brand awareness, whether or not there's a whiskey associated with it or not,
That's an interesting point, dude. I hadn't actually thought of that. But the groundwork's been laid for you, right? You're 100% right.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of people, I've heard it referred to like when people from outside of the United States think of Americans, oftentimes they think Texas, right? Like the cowboy and the guns and
I need to admit something here to you, dude. In fact, I may have already told you this, but when I was a little old New Zealand kid at 17, 18, a shiny-faced boy, I had no interest whatsoever of going to America. Like, I kind of wanted to get out of New Zealand and see the world a little bit. America was literally at the bottom of the list.
Really?
And it was for exactly that reason. I thought America was Texas, and I bought the Hollywood bullshit line of what Texas is, hook, line, and sinker.
Yep.
and I thought you guys were yokels in overalls and guns, like. And then I met my wife, and I went to California and went, oh wait, this isn't what I thought America was.
Yeah.
And I kind of started to like California a little bit, and then I decided I didn't like it, and then I came to see you guys, and I felt completely and utterly at home. Like Texas is literally, it's my spiritual home in America, pun intended with spirits. But I guess, so do you find that you have to fight that image that people have of Texas for your brand?
Yeah.
Or is it kind of like you roll with it and turn it into something good?
So I think there's an element of fighting it, but also embracing it at the same time, right? Because you're not fighting the brand. What you are is you have to understand where people are starting from in their understanding of anything. And it's kind of like if you were to say, to look at Scotland, for example, right? If you think of a Scot in your head, you're like kilt and accent and, you start thinking about all of these media generated images of what that meme is in your head. Right. But as anybody who's traveled the world knows, once you get there, that there's some stereotypes which tend to be true. Like, yeah, there's a lot of guns in Texas. That's true. That is absolutely 100% true. There is absolutely a whole lot of amazing barbecue in Texas. That is absolutely 100% true. Right. Yeah. There's a lot of wide open spaces. There's a lot of liberty. There's a lot of people on horseback, but like not walking down the streets like, you may think.
Yeah.
All of those things are elements of it, but it's also, there's a corner store and there's a grocery store and there's all the typical kind of, box store type things that you see everywhere. Right. And corporate chains and all the other kind of things. But one thing that is clear is that people's perception of Texas is one of independence. It's one of authenticity, right? I mean, kind of that cowboy ethos, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of that kind of, like I said, when I say Texas has good brand awareness, that's what I mean, is that people understand kind of the meme of Texas, even if they don't understand Texas directly, right? And, you talk about California. I mean, California and Texas kind of have this rivalrous relationship, right? A lot of the celebrities are moving, I think Joe Rogan and people like that have left California to come to Texas because there's quote unquote more freedom and things like that. But I think so there's like this rivalry, but it's important that people understand, especially globally, that Texas is a country. It really is, right? We can fly our flag at the same level as the American flag because we were our own country first. I say we, like I was there for it. I'm not. I'm an American first, but I'm a Texan too. And as a Texan, you have that identity of this is a place. And again, to compare it to Scotland, for example, the entire island landmass of Scotland can fit in an area that is Dallas to College Station to Austin, Texas. Basically, that triangle. That's Scotland. And when people make people made a pretty big deal about the 5 different whiskey regions of Scotland, right? You've got Highlands, you've got Lowlands, Campbelltown, Islay, and which one am I forgetting? Speyside. I guess technically Speyside is Highlands, but you get the idea. Like people make a lot of waves about there being regions of whiskey within one country's identity. And what I think is unique about Texas is, one, it's young in the whiskey industry, but 2, American whiskey is nothing new relatively. It's new in the history of the world, but Kentucky bourbon has been a thing for a long time now. American whiskey has obviously been big for a while now. And there were originally a lot of people who were good at marketing, but trying to capitalize on the Texas brand without making Texas whiskey in Texas. Right.
Yeah. They were just making the same old stuff and slapping a Texas flag on the bottle or something.
Right, exactly, and that is, I mean, I guess there's a couple of things legally at the federal level that make that problematic, but there's so many labels being approved by the federal government that they're not always going in and checking to make sure that everything in the bottle is matching what it says on the label.
Yeah, I've heard from a lot of people that it's essentially a honor system.
Yeah.
Until you get unlucky.
yeah. It's an honor system with I guess with an affidavit that you're basically saying that what you're saying is true. And if they catch you on the back end, then there may be penalties, but otherwise, no. It's just submit your label and be honest about it. And but for Texas, that's a problem, right? Because there's lots of places where you can make whiskey in the United States. And in fact, there's a couple of whiskey brands that are Canadian whiskey that are coming into Texas and putting Texas labels all over the bottle, right? So you're actually having products of another country come in and not identify themselves as an American product, but a Texas product. And when you get to that level of brand awareness, that people know the name Texas and they think cowboy, whiskey, those kind of things, that's an easy connection to make. But what's not an easy connection is that there actually are legitimate distilleries and innovative distillers that are doing amazing work inside of the state of Texas. And that's what this symbol up here, the certified Texas whiskey thing, was the first thing we did. Was we created a standard that said, okay, you can't call it a certified Texas whiskey unless it has all 5 steps of the whiskey making process done in Texas. So mashing, fermentation, distillation, maturation, and bottling. If you do those 5 steps inside of the territorial boundaries of Texas, then it's certifiable. And that's a pretty low bar if you think about it, right? It's just like, do the work of whiskey making inside the state where you're saying it's coming from.
It's funny because it's a low bar and also a high bar depending on where you're coming at it from, right? Like if you just talk to some random person picking up a bottle in the bottle store, they'd probably say, "Well, that's everything. What else could you do?"
Right.
But then you talk to some other people, and you're like, "Okay, well, where was the barley grown? Where was it malted? Where did the barrel come from? Where was it maturated? Where was it,
Well, and we had quite a few discussions at the beginning about like, well, can it be distilled in a different state but matured in Texas because the climate has such an impact on the maturation? And it was like, well, not really. And here's why. And it's not to be like rude to the brands that were doing that, but what it is intended to do is to create an industry. And you can't create an industry unless you have the people who are making it. That means distilling and mashing and fermenting and all of those steps that require like the human capital and talent to actually do those steps of the whiskey making process. If all of that is outsourced to another place, then you're not building an industry, you're just branding. And you maybe maturation in the state, but it's basically a branding exercise at that point. But as you know, having been here in Texas and seen, all of those steps of the process, every one of those steps is affected by the region in which it's made.
Yeah.
So we wanted to build an industry around people.
Yeah, that's not a new concept to whiskey. That is it's a pretty accepted concept that terroir is going to affect a product at multiple levels, right? And different parts of the process. I think before we go any further, Spencer, do you want to kind of articulate the difference between the trail and the association?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think when we start talking about, what people can potentially start thinking about doing in their little part of the world, we might get to some specifics that are going to not make sense if people don't understand the difference between the two. Right? Yeah,
that's a great point. So the association came first, and like I said, its goal is to make that the certified Texas whiskey mark, and that's an association standard that all of our members are at least making one product that meets the certified Texas whiskey standard, and then and this is an important point. And then every other whiskey product that is released underneath that distillery's brand or DSP number has to be true to the state of distillation especially if it's been brought in from out of state. So basically, if you've imported it from another state, you need to be honest that that is a product of another state, not a Texas.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah.
So the two rules are make one here. The rules are make one here, and then also be honest about every other whiskey product that you release that it's possibly not made in Texas, or if it is made out of Texas, be honest about where it was made, right, and label that clearly on the bottles. So we at the end of the day, the association is there for certification of some sort of a standard for what a Texas whiskey is, and transparency within the industry, because as you know, the alcohol industry is rife with deception. Let's just call it what it is, right? It's deception because it's, it has a bad history, especially in the United States with prohibition and other things. It was kind of a hush topic. So like it was inherently, at least in America, it was inherently a negative thing, or something that had to be obscured, or something that was put inside of a different bottle, or the label was changed intentionally to hide it. Like there's this long history of deception on what's on the outside of the bottle versus the inside. And so the association is there to promote transparency and to promote some sort of a standard. Now, the Trail is a subsidiary of the association, so it's adjacent to or tangential from, but it is connected because you have to be an association member to be on the Texas Whiskey Trail. That means you have to be making a certified product, and then you have to have a tour where the public is welcomed to come in and see the steps of the whiskey making process, right? So the Trail is a tourist's way to come in and learn about Texas whiskey and what makes it unique and different in a very real and hands-on way, right? And you got to be there for right about this time last year. Did the Trailblazer blend with Balcones and Jared Hempstead.
Amazing experience. I mean, in any way I look at it.
And that is a perfect example of what we want the Trail to be. Is we not completely dissimilar. I mean, first of all, trails are not unique to Texas, right?
Yeah.
Trail, Scotch Whiskey Trail. These are all things that have been done before. What we are a little bit unique in is that each one of our sections of the Trail, North Texas, Hill Country, Gulf Coast, South Texas, all of those geographically are probably the size of Kentucky itself, right?
Yeah.
Right. So because Texas is such a big state, it's so spread out. There's so many different variations in climate and style and grain availability and all these things that you really need to take a year and just understand Texas and how whiskey relates in Texas. So we sell memberships, and those memberships allow people to go visit all of these distilleries throughout the year and take a free tour at any place that they go to, and then get discounts. So it's a little bit different because we want people to engage with the Trail as a concept, and then engage with the distilleries wherever they are, and take your time, because Texas is too big to just do in a weekend or take a 5-day trip, right?
Yeah.
It's going to take some time.
I was there for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And
how many distilleries did you hit in 3 weeks?
5. I think that I actually saw. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, you saw how long it was taking. It takes 3-4 hours to drive between regions, right?
Yeah.
Minimum.
I mean, Daniel Whittington did it. Did he do every distillery on his bike in the end?
He did the first 15 when we launched the Trail. He did 15.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, the first 15. We're now at 21 distilleries on the Texas.
And how long did that take him?
I think it took him. Well, I think his bike broke down like on day 3. So it took him a little longer than I think he was planning. But I think it took him like 5 days or something like that. But it was like 10 minutes or 5 minutes at every distillery, and then hit the road again.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was showing up and hanging out with people for 8 hours, or stayed overnight or whatever. But at the same way, I kind of feel like that's what you're inviting people to do, right? You don't want them to just show up, say hi, have a look at the bottles on the shelf, maybe get a cocktail or a whiskey and piss off.
Right.
You want them to show up and actually meet the people that work there and take the tour and see what makes that distillery different from the next one you're going to, because
Right.
otherwise what's the point, right? If you're going to see the same thing over and over again, then you're not going to understand the nuance and the difference.
And they are very, this is one thing I can say with 100% of surety, that I think Texas has the most variability distillery to distillery of any place I've seen.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, granted, they're all new, so part of that is the newness of the thing. There's not like a standard model that people fit into, that this is what a distillery should look like, and this is what a distillery tour should be like. You go to Kentucky, you'll see a similar kind of style, because most all of them are doing bourbons, so that's a style that they have the same kind of grain and mash bills, and they have a history, kind of a heritage of what Kentucky bourbon is like, and it's a little bit similar. Distillery to distillery. Scotch whiskey is the same way,
especially within the region.
Yeah, and Texas whiskey is not like that. There's single malts, there's rye, there's rye malts, there's bourbons. There's so many different styles and so many different regions, and to kind of fit into that Texas independent spirit, there's not a particular way to build a distillery. And these, ladies and gentlemen that are putting this all together are doing what they want to do based on the region that they're in and based on the kind of things that they like to see. And I'd say every distillery is unique in that regard in Texas.
Oh, 100%, man. Like you put any two distilleries next to each other and you see a market difference between them, and you put three into the mix. Like the three that I probably spent the most time with would have been Balcones, Iron Root, and Andalusia.
Yep.
And you put those three together and you can draw similarities between any two of them. But, you've got Ty, who's smoking his own grain and running that awesome, like handmade, like borderline. It's basically a giant home distiller still.
It's a really big home still.
Yeah, that's awesome. And he's got a shack out the back that he's cold smoking grain in with peat that he's bringing in from Ireland. And then you go to Balcones
and Texas hardwood smoked for
yeah.
Like doing a Texas barbecue smoke on malted grains.
Yeah. And it's every part of it too. It's like you said, it's the way that the bar looks, it's the way that the distillery looks, it's the personality of the people, it's the goal, the aim, the drive of the people, it's the processes that they're using, the equipment they're using. And then, funnily enough, when you get things that are different in all those ways, the product from each of the distilleries is quite different too,
and you went to Still Austin as well. I believe, right? And they couldn't be any more different in the way that they brand themselves. They're very Austin urban. Yeah. I don't want to throw the term hipster on them, because that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but it's definitely like an Austin vibe. Right, like an Austin urban vibe. They're using a column still, a big 40-foot column still, as opposed to pot still distillation. Whereas and they also have like Nancy Fraley, the master blender, who works with them, and Iron Root. But Iron Root's using a pot still, like a Vendome large pot, custom pot still that they have. And then you go to Still Austin and you have the column still. So everything is variable and very different from distillery to distillery.
Yeah, so I think this is a nice way to kind of segue into the main thing that I wanted to talk to you about, which is it's almost like an inbuilt, innate human nature for when you find yourself in a position like that, to see people as the others, right? Like for, let's say, like for Ty to look at what anyone else is doing, or I don't want to pick on Ty specifically, but any one of those places we just talked about, to look at what everyone else is doing and saying, well, that's not what I'm about, so that's a little bit shit. And not only that, they're competing with me for bottle space on shelves, for money, basically, at the end of the day, however, whatever pathway you want to take it. And I think traditionally marketing has gone that way in a lot of different places, in a lot of different industries, in a lot of different ways that it represents itself. what are the advantages of saying, screw that, I'm not buying into any of that bollocks, and I'm actually going to find these people and treat them as an asset, as an alliance, as someone that I can collaborate with, that I can work with to make both of our lives better, basically.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
what's
like,
the attraction there?
so what I like to compare it to is, I keep using this term, creating a team of rivals, right? Like you want competition. Otherwise, it's not fun, and there's no interest, and nobody's trying to create the next best whiskey, and nobody's trying to innovate, right? If you don't have competition, there's not much innovation. So you want distilleries to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to do my thing and try to make mine the subjective best in the world, right? But at the same time, when you're talking about like a regionality or a general collective of brands, you want them to be housed underneath something that unifies them in their aim, right? So in the United States, American football is under the NFL, National Football League. And the Dallas Cowboys are never going to like the Philadelphia Eagles. They're never going to be friends. They're always going to be rivals, but they agree on the rules of the game, right? And you could apply that to any sports league throughout the world, right? Whether it's rugby, Australian rules football, FIFA football, whatever it is, the different leagues can compete with each other. But they all agree on the basic principles of the size of the field, the rules of the game, how the clock works. Those kind of things are basic standards that everybody agrees with, so that they all understand at least they're flowing in the same direction when they're running against each other, right? They're racing down the same path, right? And that is something that at the beginning of an industry is very hard to form, because there's a famine mentality at the beginning of an industry where it's like, if I work with them, then I'm going to not be the first and not get the first mover advantage. And right. Like it doesn't mesh well with that concept of the early, companies. Apple didn't work well with Microsoft.
No, they did not.
Right. Google didn't work great with Facebook, and in many ways they still don't, but you get the idea that at a certain point, the industry comes to like a level of maturity where they need to be able to say, okay, we're all agreeing on some basic principles of what this industry looks like. And when the association and the trail came to be, it was like, okay, we need to educate people on what makes Texas whiskey unique, not from each other, but from Kentucky bourbon, and what makes it unique with Japanese whiskey or Irish whiskey or Scotch whiskey, because we really do feel, and there's plenty of evidence to support this, but we really do feel like some of the best whiskeys in the world can come out of Texas. And Balcones won Best in Glass in 2013 with a single malt that was made under a bridge in Waco, Texas, and aged for a little over 2 years, and beat 25-year-old whiskeys or 20-year-old whiskeys from Scotland, right? Iron Root Republic just won World's Best Bourbon this year. First time outside of Kentucky that's happened. So it's not that awards are what define the whiskey. And I always say Texas whiskey isn't better than Scotch whiskey. It isn't better than Kentucky bourbon. It's different, and it's its own thing. And within this region, what we need to do is educate people on the variety, how whiskey's made in Texas, what makes it unique, what flavor profiles are available, and how do we get the world to understand that Texas whiskey as a category is something to be appreciated on its own.
Yeah, so it's let's take those awards for example, right? If it was just that Balcones won Best in Glass and then Iron Root won Best Bourbon, that's great for them.
Yep.
Like, okay, whoopie-doo. But when it's Balcones from Texas wins Best in Glass and Iron Root from Texas wins Best Bourbon, now suddenly people are going, wait, what the hell's going on in Texas?
And let's not forget, Garrison Brothers Balmorhea won Jim Murray last year. Jim Murray's best micro distillery bourbon whiskey in Jim Murray's Whiskey Bible. Granted,
I didn't know that.
That's one person's thing, but again, it's a pattern of recognition, and there's been lots of gold medals from the San Francisco Spirits Competition and other things that we can talk about. But and again, awards aren't everything, but they are an indication of where the conversation is starting to flow, right?
Totally, yeah.
And I always say, like, Ardbeg wouldn't be Ardbeg without Lagavulin, right?
No, yeah.
Right, and Lagavulin wouldn't be Lagavulin without Macallan and something to compare it against, right? So, like, at a certain point, you can't just say, oh, there's this one unique spirit coming out of one place that's competing with everybody in the world. It's not just that. It's that there's a group of spirits that are competing with each other and beating or being appreciated on a level at a global stage that shouldn't be happening with spirits this young. I mean, the industry is only 15 years old.
Completely punching above your weight.
Yeah.
Not in terms of size of land mass. I think you're punching a little under your weight actually on that one. But in terms of the age of the industry, for sure. So I used to work at a company that produced very high-end dog food. Yes. And there was, with anything like this, whenever you're in marketing, it's like, what's your point of difference? Like, that's kind of everything, right? Like, that's where everything comes from. And people would ask that question, and I'd have to admit, well, if you want to compare us to other New Zealand products, that's a pretty nuanced discussion. Yep. And that's kind of a crowded market. But if you want to go over to America and then compare us to everyone else globally, in a different market, now we're pretty much a blue water product, right? Like, we've got no competition really on what it is that we do. And New Zealand is starting to realize that more and more, in the fact that if we market our product as a New Zealand product almost above anything else, that carries weight because it means something elsewhere in terms of that difference. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, right? Like, so if you can be a Texas certified whiskey and be on a shelf in New Zealand,
yep, then
you've got a huge, like, that's something that sets you aside from every other product on that shelf, almost, unless there's another Texas whiskey there. And like you say, it doesn't mean that it's better. It doesn't mean, oh, that's the best whiskey here, I'm going to buy that over, whatever else you want to compare it to. But it makes it interesting for the customer, right? It creates something that is it's like a little cookie trail to go down and look at. So I'd kind of like to hear what your thoughts are on what this bringing people together and creating a region, what the benefits are for the individual distillery, like, other than what we've just sort of hinted at, and feel free to elaborate on that too. I'm sure you do it more eloquently than I.
So there's two big benefits that I see at the distillery level, and then there's a whole lot of benefits at the consumer level, right? But at the distillery level, the first thing that I've seen, and this is not unique to our group, but there's other people who are doing things in Texas whiskey that are allowing for more collaboration between distilleries. But you talked about Daniel Whittington before, and let me see if I can bring it up here. But this year was the first ever blend of certified Texas whiskeys, right? So I think it was like Balcones, Iron Root, and Andalusia blended together, and so that's an independent bottling that's giving credit to the distillers that participate in it, and created a new whiskey based on the regional characteristics. And as you know, Scotch isn't Scotch without blended Scotch, right? Like, the popularity of Scotch whiskey is because of the blended category, right? Yeah. So there's a collaboration that's happening on an individual level at the distilleries, where they can experience each other's spirits, understand from each other what their fermentation techniques were, what their distillation were, how they're making their cuts, what they're doing with their barrels. All out of that, just information sharing that happens not in in an anti-competitive way, but just like in a, you absorb the industry information way. That's one benefit. But the other benefit is it can create new products that are unified under kind of an umbrella of like, this is a Texas whiskey, whether it's made at one distillery or multiple, right? Because at that point, you can create blending profiles that meet the market wherever it is. And so it kind of expands it beyond the simple craft of we're making just enough to sell out of our distillery and pour cocktails at our distillery to, okay, we're making enough to have a product on the shelf that's our unique product, but then also our product can contribute to somebody else's, maybe go into a blend, or maybe we can have like contract distilling within the state. That's important, because if you want to make a certified Texas whiskey, it doesn't mean you have to distill it at your distillery. It means you can distill it at somebody else's distillery and use your own mash bill and use your own fermentation techniques if you wish, or your own maturation techniques. But it's happening within the state, so the industry is staying together, and that's the kind of thing that we want distilleries to be able to do. Is that there's a level of cooperation that's good. Again, to take it back to that NFL analogy, think about it as trading players. They're literally like employees that have worked now at 2 or 3 different Texas distilleries, and that experience and knowledge builds upon itself generationally. And that's when you build an industry.
So it's almost like you're allowing a greater economy of scale on each level of the business, right? Like from the employee through to maturation, like just literally the amount of spirit that can be created, but also through to, like you say, the blending and the consistency, being able to create a certain product with more certainty. Because, I mean, we've talked about this heaps on this podcast, but let's face it, consistency is one of those absolute pain in the asses for a small distillery.
Extremely difficult.
Yeah. So if you can have, actually, the more I think about this, and as I run my mouth, I realize that the genius of it is you can pull very different spirits with very different characteristics from different distilleries, because they're from different distilleries, and then you have enough volume from each of those to be able to then push a spirit in whatever direction you need within that emerging Texas style.
Like, to take it a step further, like this is an example here. This is Real Spirits, which comes from Real Ale Brewing Company, which is a large Texas craft brewery. So
which was actually the one that I'm most disappointed in myself for not being able to get to. While I was there. So next time. As
soon as this COVID mess is done, you got to make a second trip, because it'll be But they have a couple different beer styles here, like a Belgian triple and a peated malt Scotch ale, and that's those beer styles minus the hops are being thrown into a still. The current distiller came from High West, so he came from Utah down to Texas, and he's distilling. The previous distiller at Real Spirits, the first one was Ty Phelps, who's at Andalusia, 3 miles down the road. And their current distiller who's working with Davin is a guy named Elazar, who's from Balcones. He distilled at Balcones for a few years. So like that little family of, and I call it a family, but it's Texas, this kind of first generation of Texas distillers are kind of working together or working at multiple places, bringing in their experience. And I think that's why you see people doing Irish styles. You see people doing Scotch styles. You see people doing, rye malts and, triticale whiskeys and things that are more indigenous. Balcones has the blue corn varieties that they use. Iron Root uses a whole slew of different corn varieties, right?
They'll use anything they can get their hands on, those guys, I think.
Pretty much, right? So like there's experimentation and there's all of these things happening at the same time. And when people come and ask me, like, well, what is the characteristic that makes Texas whiskey unique, right? To your point, right? It's not this symbol that means Texas whiskey. That's a shield that protects the integrity of the whiskey, right? Okay. That's not the definition of Texas, because when you ask people what a Scotch is, they're probably going to tell you it's too smoky, or I don't like it, or it tastes like iodine or something like that. And they're usually referring to Islay scotches, right? And
yeah, I get
they
that all
don't,
the time.
yeah, and they don't realize that there's a whole variety. And some people don't even realize that Scotch is whiskey, right? It's just like, well, that's Scotch. And then people are like, well, let's make a Texas Scotch. I was like, that's not possible, you know? So, but you can make a Texas single malt that competes with all these Scotches. And those are the kind of things that you can do. So when people ask me what makes Texas unique, invariably, every time I say it's talent. It's talent, talent, talent. Because we have extreme temperatures down here. Time is still an important part of it, but it's not as important as it is in Scotland, right? We don't need 24 years to make an amazing spirit.
No, you've got the opposite problem.
We do.
You're trying to figure out how to keep it in a cask longer.
Exactly. And that's where I say it's talent. It takes the people who understand what a good whiskey should taste like and trying to refine that process. And you're maybe checking things daily to see when you should pull it.
I had multiple distillers tell me that they will literally check daily. Like there's some stuff that they check it and they're like, right, we need to get this out of the cask now, because if we're going to bottle it in the next week, but by tomorrow it'll be completely different. It might be a 25 degrees Celsius swing overnight, and it'll just be a completely different product. That's bonkers, man.
Well, I mean, literally right now, as we speak, there's a cold front that is like stalled out over Austin. And the northern part of Austin is 20 degrees Fahrenheit colder than the south side of Austin right now as we speak.
Yeah.
So if your distillery is on the north side of that, because like these cold fronts come in through the Rockies down the plains, and then they usually make their way through the Austin region, but then the Gulf of Mexico moist air will push it back. So there's this kind of back and forth, and we're kind of right on that borderline. And I think that's why you see a lot of distilleries here, because it creates an interesting aging environment. And in the north, they get extremes even colder than we do down here. But in the Gulf Coast, they get all that moist, warm, humid air that actually decreases the proof in the barrel because the moisture re-enters the barrel.
Yeah,
so it's completely different part of state to part of state. And that's why I think it takes talent to understand what good whiskey is, how to make it, and how to make it where you are within the state of Texas. That makes it important.
Yeah. People ask me a lot, what's so great about Texas whiskey? And I've struggled with it, man, because it's, in some ways I want to say its maturation is a huge part of it because of the extremes. But then I think Garrison Brothers and Andalusia, and I'm like, okay, well, you can't say that that's two totally different things. It's, so I think you're right.
20 minutes away from each other? Less than that?
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. But I think it's also the beauty of an emerging region, right? Like you've got so many that no one's pigeonholed because they're a Texas distillery yet. Right. Like if you open a Irish whiskey distilling company or a Islay distilling company, people are going to expect a very certain thing from you.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, if you try and buck that trend, it's not going to go well for you. Whereas you guys have got free reign, man. You can do whatever you want, right? Like you said, you're making within reason, within style.
No,
reason.
I mean, look, I think you're exactly right. I think, if I'm to project, 50, 100 years from now, I think there's probably going to be a style based on a region. There will be a hill country style that's more approachable. I'm guessing that's the way things will trend. That said, there's nothing to indicate that right now, right?
It's really not,
It literally is the Wild West of whiskey, because you can go to Still Austin and get a column stilled bourbon done with a French élevage proofing technique.
Yep.
Go 20 minutes down the road and get a blended whiskey at Crowded Barrel. Go another 30 minutes down the road and get smoked single malts next to a place that's doing malted whiskey from beer styles, and then go up the road and go to Garrison Brothers and have a true, almost Kentucky style bourbon done in a Texas fashion that is completely different from Kentucky. but is still a bourbon in a very traditional sense. And you're just, okay, well, where am I? I could be in Scotland, I could be in Ireland, I could be in Kentucky. These are all just like influences that are making Texas whiskey unique. And that's not too dissimilar from Texas itself. There's French influences. I mean, if you ever heard of the Six Flags theme park, right?
Yeah.
Six Flags is actually originally from the Six Flags of Texas, right? The six countries.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
So there are the 6 countries that flew their flag over the state of Texas, right? So you have like, everything from, French and Spanish to the American to the Confederate to there are all these territories that claimed Texas. So there's, Germanic heritage, there's Spanish, there's French, there's all these influences in Texas because it was such a kind of sought after piece of land that it's a lot like the culture of Texas. It's just like, well, bring what you got and do it here and make it unique here. And I think that's really attractive to somebody who wants to experience a tourism experience of what whiskey can be like within a region.
Oh, totally. It's another excellent segue. Thank you, Spencer. I was just thinking that most of what we've been talking about has come from the association side, like kind of it's introspective and it's industry facing. What we've been talking about, benefits of this sort of allegiance of this. What did you call them? Team of rivals.
Team of rivals.
Yeah. Whereas there's also the consumer facing side of stuff too, like, which is both a benefit for the consumer, and anything that's a benefit for the consumer is ultimately going to be a benefit for the people that are bringing those consumers in, right? Like,
that's right.
That's what business is. So do you want to talk a little bit about how collaboration and just this general idea of being able to work together while still trying to kick each other's ass?
So
what works there?
From a consumer standpoint, like, and you were there for one of our premier early trail events, which was the Balcones one. And we want 2 things to happen. We want the consumer to be educated and to get to taste some new and interesting things in the process. And then get that out into the market so that more people can taste the thing that was created either with the trail members' help or because they were trying to work with trail members to create an expression that will meet the consumers where they are. And that's something that I don't think you get to see in a lot of distilleries. It's like, here's what we have, and we have a big variety, and you might find what you like, but you're not going to have input. It's a one-way conversation, right?
And maybe you get a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, but that's it. Yeah. I'm the artist, and you just stay over there and like you say, like, enjoy the amazing stuff that I'm putting out into the world. Or
exactly. I mean, think of it as like making a movie, right? Like if you went to a backstage production, tour of a movie studio or something like that, you would get to see how they make it, but you don't necessarily get to involve yourself into making the movie, right? Yeah. What we want to do with the Texas Whiskey Trail is get the consumers out there in a way that they can actually have an influence in what products are released in the future, right? So this is a great example of that. This will be the 4th of our Trailblazer official selections. So let's see that little icon there. So that meant that the members of the Texas Whiskey Trail, if you're the top level of membership, there you go. If you're a Trailblazer, we have these random moments where a Trailblazer will get to come and be part of a team, whether it's 5 people or 20 people or whatever it is. Lately, because of COVID, it's fewer rather than more. But because of that desire to kind of involve them, we want to bring them in, work with the distillery, and have a direct hand in shaping a new whiskey that consumers will want. Right. So this is like I said, it's a blend of 2 different whiskeys styles from the real heavy Scotch ale and their Devil's Backbone Belgian triple style beer that have been distilled and matured, but then it's partially finished in port casks. And so we had our trail members go and broke them into teams, and then they all blended their own their own proportions of those 3 types of casks. And then they put that together with the master distiller Real Spirits as the 4th team. And then we blind tasted everybody's thing and came out with a winner that actually became this product. And for the first time ever, we've got these like into stores. And so this is actually hitting shelves and directly influenced by the trail members. So the goal of the trail is, like I said, education on one hand, 2, just fun. It's just fun to go visit distilleries and enjoy yourself and relax and have fun. So that's part of it. And we have like a point system where people can earn points for every visit that you make to a distillery and use that to renew your membership next year, whatever. And but also to actually create product in the process and let the consumers interact directly with the distiller, as you did with Jared, and say, okay, well, this is what I'm thinking. This is what my flavor profile leans towards. And they get to hear that in a very intimate, concentrated way, instead of kind of working in an artist's bubble and just putting things out into the world and hope they work. So I think it's a pretty unique model, and it creates an environment where you want to go and tour distilleries and see how you can influence things.
The genius of it to me is that in any product or industry or sport, for example, you're always going to have a spectrum of fans or purchasers or whatever it happens to be, right? You're going to have the casual person that'll, kind of turn up to a game when it's convenient for them, and maybe they've got a team cap.
Yeah.
Or whatever, Then you've got the other people that literally, exactly, yeah. Then you've got the other people that literally choose where they live because it's closest to their, their home team's arena, and they have season passes. They go to every freaking game. The idea of selling a pass is heresy. How dare you do that?
Right.
Like they've got an entire cupboard full of, you get the idea, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that what you're doing is you're allowing the people that are the super fans of either whiskey, Texas whiskey, or a specific distillery.
Yep.
You're allowing them to have more access to what it is that they really, really love, which in turn almost levels them up to a extra super duper fan. And then they turn into a brand ambassador, basically, and they get, dude, after I did that thing with Jared, it's all I could talk about for the next week. When
I mean, how unique is that in the world of whiskey and distilling to get to be with a master distiller?
It doesn't happen.
Master distiller of the year that year that you did it.
It doesn't happen. Yeah. And so the very fact that I got to do that meant that I went and, to use Roy's lexicon, evangelized about it. I went out and told people who Jared was. I went out and told people what the trail was. I went out and told people about Balcones product, about Texas product. And that was all facilitated because of the fact that I was allowed to go and, exactly like you're saying, not just be a fly on the wall, but actually have a hand in something, which let's go back to the sports fan. Imagine if some of the fans were able to choose the lineup for the night or something, it's kind of that level of interaction that just doesn't happen. So from the consumer side, it's amazing. And then from the distiller's side, it's advertising that you just can't pay for. You can't buy that level of, I guess the
engagement.
People know when you're full of shit, right? It's basically what it comes down to. And when I'm talking passionately about something, they know that I'm talking about it because I love it. And then you kind of have the same idea as the way people try to sell excuse me, like a lot of tech, right? They sell it with the idea, if they sell it to the geeks, they make it amazing for the geek, specifically because they know the geek's going to go to a barbecue that weekend, and they know that is in their circle of friends and in their family and their wider sphere, that's the go-to person. So, Spencer's the geeky techie guy. I need a new computer. I'm going to go talk to Spencer. What should I buy? Buy this. Yep. And it's not, it's because we reached you specifically. So you're sort of tapping into that whole idea, but doing it in a way that's not slimy or It's not marketing. It's just putting people together.
And Daniel Whittington talks about this at the Wizard Academy classes that he teaches. But like, there's a real big difference between evangelizing something and being manipulative.
Yes, right? That's exactly what I'm getting at.
And an evangelical, not in the religious sense, but an evangelical is somebody who saw something firsthand and went out and felt the need to tell somebody about it.
Yeah.
Right.
I love it so much. I want you to know about it too, because maybe you'll love it.
Right. I mean, that's again, not to go religious here, but like that's what evangelical Christianity is the people who were there around Jesus wanted to go out and evangelize on his behalf because they were there.
Yeah,
right.
And that's what the word means. Like let's make sure that
that's right.
That people understand what we're saying. We're removing evangelize from any religious context and just talking about what the word actually means.
Right. It just means to go out and speak the good word about the thing that you experienced firsthand. Right. So when that is facilitated because you were actually there, then it is coming from a place of honesty, and it is coming from a place of transparency. If it's not starting from that point, then that's influencer marketing and manipulation and all the other things that go along with it, right? Yeah. That frankly, this world is seeing the impacts of right now, right?
Yeah, it's two very different. You could have got in touch with me and said, I'll buy you a hotel and I'll pay you X amount of dollars. Come along and make a video. That's slimy, dirty.
Yeah.
There's, hey, dude, I like what you do. I reckon we'd get along. We've met once. Why don't you come and hang out? And then, oh, by the way, I'm doing this cool thing. Come along and enjoy it with me. Like it's two very separate things. Yeah.
And it creates it's based in truth. And we have the tagline for the association that's called Taste the Truth, because that's what we really want people to do. We want people to be able to know that this product was made the way you're seeing it being made. You may have a hand in it if you're a trail member and you can actually taste the thing that you made. But here's the most important thing is, both in your case with the Balcones event that you attended, and for the trail members that were part of this in making this bottle, what was interesting is in both cases, they were blind tastings at the end of it. Remember?
Yeah.
And in your case and with Real Spirits, the Master Distillers blend was the one that won.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's really significant because the trail members knew that it was fair, knew that it was blind. They knew that they had their own influence into a final product. But then when it came to which is the best product, it came from the experts' hands, right? It came from the Master Distillers formulation that everybody was like, oh yeah, that is better. And that there was a realization in their head. It's like, okay, not only is this difficult, but these people are really talented to make something this difficult taste this good. And they come out of it with a level of respect that is not to say that they didn't have a direct hand in this. They had a hand in it for sure. But what they realized in the process was that this is a difficult industry to make a really, really solid product at, to make a good living at, how much of a toll it can take on families and friends to be part of an industry like this. Like all of those things are experienced by the consumer. And that's real evangelism, because they're seeing what, people are sacrificing to put a good product into a glass that you get to enjoy on a Friday or Saturday evening in front of a fire. Right.
Yeah,
like
100%. Yeah.
It is way, way more than just a liquid that's put into a bottle and marketed. Right.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So
I still run into it. I still run into it all the time. Which is funny coming from the home distilling side of things. Just basically the idea of, dude, whiskey's whiskey. It either tastes good or it tastes bad. Get over it. Like, why are you making this all artsy fartsy and complicated? No, dude. There really is a difference. Yeah. That's an interesting one, man.
Well, to go back to like a movie, like movie making, right? Right now, it's almost disposable. You pop on Netflix or something like that. You watch a movie, and it's like, do you realize how many people went into the production of that, and how many jobs are supported by that? And yes, it's art, but it's also art and science. You have computer scientists who are working on visualizations, and just think of, to put it in your parlance, think of Lord of the Rings and how much of an impact that had on the economy of New Zealand, right? Like,
Totally.
And it's several hours per movie that you're watching that may seem disposable depending on if you did or didn't like it. It doesn't matter if you did or didn't like it. It took a lot of work to get there. And if you don't like the product, that's fine, but at least you can respect how it was made. And
very much
on the trail, we have lots of people who do not like whiskey, but they love the process of it, and they love the community of it, and they love the people that they get to meet when they're sitting around an outdoor fire pit outside of the distillery, having a cocktail, and maybe it's not whiskey filled at all. It's just they're around it, and they understand the type of people that work in that industry, and I think it adds a lot to it.
Yeah, I think it also it does help breed everything we've talked about so far today. It helps breed a consumer that, how do you put it? It's almost, I would rather reach for a bottle that I've never had before than reach for a bottle that I know I love. And that extends almost to the point where I would rather reach for something that I know I probably won't like, but it's gonna teach me something about what's in that bottle that I don't know already, than for something that I do like. And all of this idea helps. Everything we've talked today feeds into that, right? It feeds into educating a consumer on what goes into a bottle so they can enjoy it conceptually almost as much as they enjoy it on their taste buds. Agreed. Which is, I think, great for the industry as a whole, because it means that consumers will try different things. I mean, it kind of, in some ways, it kills the idea of brand loyalty, blah, 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 to some extent. But let's be honest, I think traditionally brand loyalty in that sort of sense was mostly like Johnny Walker or, just like whatever. I
keep drinking it.
Yeah. It's not like there was a huge, I mean, if you're a new distillery, you don't have a huge brand loyalty, right? Like craft distillery.
That's important too. Like, I mean, in order to keep you can't just cater only to the geekiest of the geeky. I mean, you're talking about,
totally.
like iPhones.
Yeah.
Like an iPhone release that just came out, like everybody's going to be like, oh, what's the, 60 frames per second, full HDR video, all these, you can get really geeky about it, or you can be like, does it take good pictures of my kid? Does it fit well into my pocket? Does it work for me on a daily basis? And
totally.
That's the goal of the association and the trail, is to get people who want to be educated, give them the opportunity to go that far. But then for the secondary and tertiary people that are learning about the industry, or maybe just want to have a daily drinker that they appreciate or can mix into old fashions, great, that we have that too.
It doesn't break the bank.
Right. You have that too, but now you understand and appreciate the category a little bit better. And that's important too, because it's putting food on people's tables, and it's keeping these businesses afloat during hard times. It's an important thing.
That's actually something too, and we talked before, and we don't want to dwell on what's going on too much, but do you want to talk just a little bit, because I know it's something you're passionate about, and it's something I'm passionate about too, about essentially voting with your wallet to help support people that are local, that that you believe in, and the importance of that.
So I mean, look, COVID has thrown the entire world for a loop, right? I mean, we were talking a little bit about this before, but like, I don't think there is a back to normal anymore. I think there's only whatever there's pre-COVID and post-COVID, right?
Yeah.
But
BC.
But the one thing that is hard about the whiskey and any spirits industry for that matter is the fact that, well, one, and it's especially difficult in whiskey because there's time involved, right? Like, you have to be making stuff today for the future, right?
Yeah.
So, but what's difficult about it is that if you didn't have brand recognition before this event, when everything closed down and travel stopped and everybody was forced to stay home and order everything in for delivery to their home, or curbside pickup or whatever it is, however they get their product, if you didn't have brand recognition before that, you didn't really get, you're probably not benefiting during the pandemic, everybody talks about how alcohol sales are up because alcohol is one of those recession-proof kind of things where if times are good, people drink. If times are bad, people drink.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a good thing. But in the craft space, if you didn't have brand recognition before this, then you're probably really struggling. And we're definitely seeing that in Texas. And you said voting with your wallet. I think that's important, but only to the extent that you need to make sure that people only to the extent that you need to make sure that people get what they want and know that there's other options out there other than the big brands, right? I'm not saying go buy a small brand just because it's small, because if it doesn't taste good and you don't like it, don't get it, right? But if it is a comparable or better product than some of the national or international brands that are out there, it's really worth giving it a shot, because that money is making a real impact on the ability of artisans and scientists and people who work in this industry to come together and actually create more things that you'll like in the future. Because I hate it usually when people say this, but when you're voting with your wallet now, you're investing in good whiskey in the future, because it takes that much time for it to come back. And that's what we want people to do on the trail is invest in the distilleries that are making amazing things now, because you want this to be generational. You want to see this grow, I promise you.
Yeah, you really do. And just to be clear, guys, we're not talking specifically about Texas here. I'm talking about wherever you happen to be. If you especially like somewhere like New Zealand, where we're so far removed from everywhere, if there is a distillery, a small distillery, or whatever, a small freaking cake shop, I don't really care what it is, but if there's something that you believe in and something that you enjoy, those are the people that need your patronage right now, because going back to the Johnny Walker thing, Johnny Walker doesn't need your money right now to not survive. Sure, they might have to lay a few people off or whatever, but I'm pretty freaking sure that whatever happens, there's going to be a Johnny Walker brand in 5 years' time.
Yep.
After this, but your little local distillery that just sunk a whole lot of money into whatever it happens to be, getting another container of barrels or something, and then you get the idea, guys. So sorry, I know everyone's heard this.
Don't be sorry at all. That's exactly what we want people to do. We finally are allowed to open up distillery tasting rooms again in Texas.
Nice.
In most counties, some counties are still closed. So we are heavily encouraging anybody, especially now when we may not see a lot of the international travel like we did last year with you and others, but if you're in the United States and you want to take a road trip, it's worth coming and driving around Texas and visiting some distilleries, because it's a safe way to do it. There's plenty of hand sanitizer. These guys have been making it like crazy. So they're doing things safely, intelligently. They have protocols in place, and they're making a product that is just, in my opinion, is just fantastic. So it's worth time.
I can 100% vouch for Texas whiskey as a whole.
Yeah.
If you are at all into whiskey in any way, shape, or form, if you like any whiskey, you're going to find something in Texas that vibes with you. Whether it be conceptual, whether it be geeky, whether it be process driven, whether it be marketing and what the freaking bottle looks like, whether it's style driven, whatever it is that you're into in terms of whiskey, you're going to find something coming out of Texas that is very, very attractive to you.
Yeah.
All right, dude. I think we're getting close to wrapping up, but I want to pose a question to you that is really weighted and tricky because I know the amount of work that you and everyone else has put into getting this thing off the ground and getting it moving in Texas. But if there are people out there that are seeing a lack of this kind of unification or the team of rivals, either from the industry side, industry facing, or from the Texas Whiskey Association side, or from the Texas Whiskey Trail side, customer facing, practically speaking, how can people go about even starting to think about getting something like this off the ground? Because it just has to be such a huge, daunting, it's a scary proposition, right? Like, how the hell do you get started? You're right. It is a heavy question. Look, I got it started
by having lots of conversations with people in a fair way, right? And I think, and it's not easy. It took almost 6 years before people were ready to, one, entertain that conversation in a real way, and two, take steps to form something that could turn that conversation into reality. So,
and let's be fair too. You're talking about new distilleries here.
Yeah.
Like the oldest distillery in Texas would have been what, 4 or 5 years old at that stage?
About at that time, it was about 6 years old.
Okay. Yeah. So it's an infant industry, and people are worried about where the money comes from for the next order of.
Yeah, these were distilleries that were mostly selling hats and T-shirts to make money, rather.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. 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 So you kind of had that working against you.
Yeah. I might have, in retrospect, I might have started a little bit too early in those conversations. But very truly, like, I think there's value to sticking to your guns of truth, right? There's value in trying to get people to understand that it's not all about it's not a what do you call it, a zero-sum game, right?
Yeah.
To get people to understand that there is a tide that can lift everybody, and that cooperation is good, and consolidation behind principles, if not necessarily finances, is what you want. You want people to understand that there are some principles that you can get behind. And that's true in democracy. That's true if you have an HOA, like a homeowners association. It doesn't matter. You got to make sure people understand that there's some basic principles that we can agree on. And if you can get it down to that level, then people start coming together, and then you start building from there. But you can't start with like the trail idea, because it's a fun idea, and say, let's build a trail. You got to start with what is the basic thing that everybody agrees with, and then build up from that point. So treat people with respect. Tell people what you mean, and understand and listen to them, and understand that they have their own needs, they have their own financial requirements, and you're going to have to meet them where they are, and then push them into the next phase of what this could be. But it's a gradual process. It takes time, and it takes a lot of effort. It's a lot like whiskey.
Good things take time, man. Yeah. So you find a kernel of truths, a base level of principles that is kind of the hill that everyone's willing to die on in terms of what you want to stand for.
Yep.
And then build it from there. That makes a lot of sense. It really does, because let's face it, you do need a lot of trust and common ground to be able to even start having these sorts of conversations, right? So if you form that first and show that you are your intentions are pure, you can build from there. Good
marketing and good execution stems out of a baseline understanding that nobody wants to go less than, right? I mean, not to put it in war terms, but you have your lines, and you don't want anything to get behind those lines. And you may have things that go out in front and try to gain ground, but you gotta secure your lines first, right? And I think that's what this standard here is, the Certified Texas Whiskey Standards. That's the baseline of we don't want to retreat from the concept that Texas whiskey should be made in Texas. Basic level, right?
I don't know, man. That's a pretty out there concept, Spencer. Yeah.
But you can build from there, and new things will come out of it, and a new industry could form out of it. But the great thing is that the consumers, the people, everybody who wants to be involved with it, they have a place if they want to be a part of it. You just got to agree on the basics, and then you can move from there. And that's just a human thing. That has nothing to do with whiskey. Just meet them where they are, understand the baseline thing, and then you can have a conversation.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. There's not a lot of that happening in the world right now.
No, there isn't.
It's a skill and a art and a science that, You know what I'm saying. Enough of that.
It's hard, and I do think a lot of people can learn from whiskey. Is that there's basic things. I mean, you're talking about grains, right? There's basic things that you can make something amazing out of. So if you can apply that to life, and you can say, hey, here's some base level things that I'm going to agree on with you, and we're not going to go below that in the level of discourse, then we can build something up from there that's amazing. That's a good thing for everybody right now.
Yeah, that really is. That is a perfect place to leave this. Thank you so much, Spencer. I thoroughly appreciate you, man, and I appreciate your time too. So, yeah, cheers, man. And
dude, we gotta get you down here, and we got to get you some good whiskey, and I can't wait to see you again.
I know. Yeah, it is corny to say family, but it really does feel like a family in Texas on every level. Like there's the family hospitality sort of stuff that's just amazing there, but the industry as a whole and the consumers as a whole too. It just, I don't know, it vibes with me, man. I can't wait. I feel for you guys not being able to have that access to, for want of a better word, tourists, I guess. Yeah. And you had so much steam and so much momentum built up that it really is quite tragic. But I'm sure
we're gonna keep plowing through, and we're doing some really fun things with the trail. So we're gonna keep it going. And as soon as, like I said, today I feel like everybody can safely do things, but as soon as you all feel safe, come and see us. I guarantee you every distillery will have a smiling face, even if it's under a mask, to see you.
100%. All right. Thanks, Spencer. I appreciate it, man.
All right. Thank you.